Cheers.
It's in my contract when I finish the concert that they have a cold beer for me afterwards. I don't drink very much, but just a beer after a concert, that's all I have.
To byl krásný úvod, ne? Pivečko na úvod a já mohu dosvědčit, že skutečně po koncertě si maestro jenom tak loknul. Just a sip, didn't you? Yes. You've been on stage, maestro, for nearly 40 years. It's incredible, it's true. Would you by any chance remember when you played this violin piece by Dvořák for the very first time? When and where?
It's very easy for me to remember because
Is it?
I only learned this piece 6 years ago.
Did you really?
Yes. I learned all the major repertoire like Beethoven, Brahms, Mendelssohn when I was 13 years old, 14 years old. But Dvořák Concerto was not played so much when I was growing up, and I loved it when I heard it, and somehow I just never learned it until finally 6-7 years ago. I said I have to learn Dvořák. It's a very special piece, and then so it's really rather new for me, but I feel like I've been playing it my whole life. I love it so much. I love Dvořák. Always loved Dvořák. My father, his favorite composer was Dvořák. I played all of the chamber music and, of course, the symphonies. But the concerto is rather new, but it's a great piece.
Moje otázka byla, na pódiu maestro se vyskytuje už skoro 40 let. Je to neuvěřitelné a je to tak 4 dekády. Jestli si pamatuje, kdy poprvé hrál tento Dvořákův houslový koncert. A on se směje a říká, no to není tak dlouho, to je 6-7 let, protože když já jsem byl kluk, bylo mi 13-14, tak jsem se učil všechny ty významné houslové koncerty, Beethoven, Brahms, Mendelssohn, ale tenkrát se Dvořákův houslový koncert moc nehrál veřejně, takže já jsem ho znal. Dvořáka samozřejmě jsem miloval a miluju. Pro mého tatínka to byl nejoblíbenější skladatel. Hrál jsem jeho komorní hudbu, hrál jsem jeho symfonie, ale ku podivu na toto koncerto jsem se dostal až teda před 6-7 lety.
I think when I was growing up, the narrative for Dvořák Violin Concerto was that the cello concerto is great, the violin concerto is okay, but not the best Dvořák piece. It's just complete bullshit. But for some reason, some people think this, but this is, don't listen to anything people say about negative ever about the great masters like Schumann or Dvořák. Sometimes they say, oh, Schumann didn't orchestrate well, and Tchaikovsky did not know how to develop his music. It was just beautiful. People are idiots because there are a few great geniuses. Dvořák knew exactly what he was doing. The violin concerto is perfect. It's just not easy, and it doesn't play itself. And it can sound bad if you play it bad, but it's one of the great pieces.
Ten narrativ, nebo to vyprávění, takový obecný názor, když já jsem dospíval na Dvořákův houslový koncert, byl, no ano, ten jeho čelový koncert, to je něco, ale ten houslový, to už tak není ono. Prosím vás, je to absolutní blbost. Nevěřte tomu. Blbost, yes, it's a bullshit in Czech, okay. Absolutní blbost. Nevěřte tomu, lidi říkají nesmyslné věci. Říkají, Tchaikovsky neuměl myšlenku dotáhnout, Schumann neuměl rozepsat.
There are certain things people like to say, the critics and people who know it all about music, they like to say things that are cliché. That like that, but anyway, I love the Dvořák. I think we know that now. Okay.
Prostě lidi často si myslí, že rozumí hudbě a vedou o tom strašné řeči a jsou to nesmysly. Ale já jsem ještě zapomněl říct důležitou věc, že ten houslový Dvořákův koncert není vůbec jednoduchý. Vůbec není snadný a musí se hrát dobře, protože když se hraje špatně, tak je to absolutní průšvih. Talking about that, the thing that you mentioned, that the Dvořák violin concerto is not actually easy. You surely know that Dvořák had a long discussion with Joachim, and he sort of recomposed some of the parts, and then in the end, it was played by another soloist, the Czech soloist. Nevertheless, through Joachim, I want to draw our attention to one of his pupils, a man called Bronislav Huberman, because you played on the violin chord like this. Would you please very shortly elaborate the story behind the violin?
Well,
I just say in Czech,
yeah,
okay? Já jsem se odpíchl od toho, že ten koncert není jednoduchý. Víme samozřejmě, že Dvořák měl dlouhé debaty několik let se solistou Joachimem, kterého žádal, aby ten koncert provedl premiérově, nestalo se. A když už jsem zmínil tohle jméno, tak jedním z Joachimových žáků byl jistý Bronislav Huberman. A to nás přivádí k dalšímu příběhu.
So my violin was made by Stradivari in 1713. And it was played by the very famous violinist Huberman from Poland in the 1920s and 30s. But this violin has a crazy history because it was stolen from Huberman in 1936 in Carnegie Hall. He left it backstage and it was disappeared for 50 years. So he never saw the violin again, Huberman. It only came about again after, in 1986, when the thief, the person who stole it, a violinist, he admitted on his deathbed that he had stolen the instrument from Huberman. So it has a crazy history. That's why I can see it. Always see it on the corner of my eyes.
Exactly.
But but it is one of the great violins, and classical music is amazing because we have these connections to people that are long dead, like Dvořák, like Mozart. But we feel like Huberman, through the violin, you feel like you know them through their music, through their recordings, through the instrument. You feel connected to history. Playing here tonight, playing Dvořák in this hall where I know Dvořák conducted here, it's an amazing feeling. You feel like they're still alive in some way, and the violin itself is 300 years old and carries many stories that many we will never know. But
Tak to jméno Huberman, abychom to vzali krátce, říká maestro. No, to byl známý polský houslista, který ve 20. 30. letech minulého století hrál na tyhle housle Stradivari 1713 a v roce 1936 v Carnegie Hall mu je ukradli v šatně, když byl chvíli na pódiu bez nich. No a mělo to neskutečnou další vývoj neskutečný, protože až do roku 1986 se ty housle nenašly. Huberman se nikdy nedožil toho, že by byly nalezeny a ten houslista průměrný mimochodem, který je ukradl, nebo si je nechal ukrást, to už je jedno, tak se k tomu přiznal až na smrtelné posteli. Takže to je ten příběh těch houslí a maestro k tomu dodává, tak jako pěkně to završuje ten konkrétní příběh tím, že říká, že klasická hudba je úžasná tím, že přes lidi minulosti, Dvořák, taky Huberman a kdokoliv další, vlastně nás propojuje, jako by ti lidé byli stále s námi, jako by stále byli živí a byli tady. Just a little remark concerning the bow, because you wrote in some of the interviews you made at the long distance that the bow is something like a voice for a singer.
Well, the bow is the breath of the violin. So if the violin is maybe the voice, the bow is the breath. So it's equally important as the instrument. And I play on a tourt bow, which is the Stradivari of bows, and it's a very special bow as well, and it's it's very personal, and so it takes a lifetime to find the perfect bow for you. For the instrument, it has to match. Bow is also.
And was it produced?
It was made in the early 1800, maybe 1810, something like that. So a bit later than the violin, but Francois Tourt was actually the first one to make the bows like this, the way it's made. Because before, in the Baroque time, the bows were shaped very differently. And so Tourt was an innovator. And this is actually kind of a miracle that the first innovator of the bow was the best that ever happened. There's no bow that is better than his, which is kind of crazy, because you would think they would get better and better. And there's nothing better than a Tourt bow, which is kind of crazy.
Samozřejmě housle je jedna věc, na to se vždycky každý ptá, ale hrozně důležitý je taky smyčec, to, čím se na housle hraje. A maestro k tomu má takové krásné přirovnání, říká, housle jsou hlas, jakoby, ale smyčec, to je ten dech. To je to, co vlastně navazuje na ten hlas jako takový. Ptal jsem se, na jaký smyčec hraje. Je to nástroj z roku 1810, čili o něco mladší tedy, než ty housle samotné. Nicméně od muže jménem Francouz, který vlastně byl inovátorem, protože předtím barokní hously barokní smyčec vypadal takhle, zatímco on byl inovátor a vytvořil už ten tvar. A co je zajímavé, nikdo ho už potom nepřekonal. On jako inovátor udělal nejlepší smyčce, které dodnes máme. Yes. Maestro.
We have some young people, they have to go to sleep here.
Jsou tady nějaký mladí, musí už spát, tak to vememe for friend.
They play violin? Piano. Great. Thank you for coming.
We are on the threshold of a new season.
Yeah.
You just came from Georgia, didn't you?
Yes, I was just last week in Georgia, the week before in Hong Kong, and I don't know where. Yeah, so it's my life for 40 years.
To je můj život. Jsme na prahu nové sezóny, byl jsem v Gruzii, předtím jsem byl v Hongkongu. You've released 2 new albums, and one is both are interesting, of course, but one is interesting because it opens the way to a music which was forgotten by a Ukrainian author, right?
Yes.
Would you just very shortly say?
Yes, I just released a concerto. Someone sent me some years ago the score of a concerto by Thomas de Hartmann, who's someone probably no one knows here. I did not know who he was, and this is before the Ukrainian war and with Russia. This was the recording is not political at all. It's not. I'm not doing it for the Ukraine, although it happens to be very poignant now because the concerto was written during World War II in 1943, and it describes the pain of war, but also incredible beauty. This concerto. So I couldn't believe that nobody played it, and it was never recorded because it's a actually gorgeous piece. So I'm very happy. I just recorded it with the Lviv Orchestra from Ukraine. They came to Warsaw. I brought them there to record. So that part was a little bit political in that I was trying to help some. It was a nice thing to see these people coming from who are. To see them work and to make a recording and make music. It was very moving to play with this orchestra from Ukraine. Music that we all were discovering, and it's a really beautiful piece by Thomas de Hartmann Concerto. So that's that. I just released that, and then also some Mendelssohn trios,
yes.
Which is Mendelssohn, one of my favorite composers, with Stephen Isserlis and Jeremy Dink, American pianist, whom we play a lot together. So, still making some recordings here and there.
Jsme na prahu nové sezóny, je spousta nových turné, ale teď vyšla čerstvě 2 alba, o kterých se kratice chceme zmínit na závěr tohoto povídání. Jedno totiž připomíná tvorbu skladatele, kterého asi neznáte, já jsem ho sám neznal, říká maestro, a sice Thomas de Hartmann. Ukrajinský autor, nebo autor z území dnešní Ukrajiny, který pak žil v Americe. A já jsem do té jeho hudby se zamiloval. Zprvu to vlastně vůbec nemělo žádnou politickou konotaci. Prostě chtěl jsem to natočit, ale je to za prvé hudba, která vznikla za druhé světové války 1943, čili je tam kromě té krásy i to velké drama. A zároveň to, co na tom bylo aktuální a politické, bylo to, že jsme to natočili ve Varšavě s orchestrem ze Lvov in Czech. A bylo velmi dojemné vidět, jak tito lidé přijeli a ponořili se do hudby a hráli ji. Kromě toho další album taky zase zachycuje Mendelssohnova tria, ale to už bychom byli příliš dlouzí. Maestro, thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming tonight.
What a pleasure.
Thank you.
tu vyšel byl.